questions, comments, feedback to share? Yes, one, and then please.
Yeah, sure. I actually just I do want to say, Carl. I actually do want, like, Carl, your presentation, and also Jessica and Ahmed, your presentation. First of all, thank you very much for such eloquent and also elegant presentations, because your projects really inspired me to think a lot. Carl, I think I really love your project in a way that, because, like, in a kind of personal way, I have also been thinking a lot about these issues. And your presentation actually reminded me of two issues, which I would like to pick your brain to see what you think about it. First of all, it's the limitation of language. Because the idea is that I noticed that there is a linguistic slip, and it's not your fault, it's actually language itself that is at fault. The idea is that precisely what you're trying to locate is the inarticulability and also the kind of indiscrimination between universality and locality, universality and individuality, and, as you absolutely point out, phenomenon and noumenon, and we can go on for ages. But at the same time, when we are analyzing some of the artworks, there is a tendency for us to go into the idea of universality, right? Somehow art, you mentioned at one point, somehow these pieces of art access something that is universal. But what these pieces of art are accessing, to some extent, is precisely that very non-state of indistinction and indiscrimination between universality and individuality. And so that's the idea of, like, the limitation of language, which really reminds me of projects, for example, Azadeh Emadi's project to look at Islamic art in terms of looking for linguistic spaces where that particular non-state / state has been articulated in certain texts, right? And, or if we like, I look at Sanskrit and Pali, those places where these ideas, because I do think that that particular linguistic problem actually bothers Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari a lot. And the other thing I'm also thinking about is the fact that the other thing when we're thinking about artistic works, we're also thinking about what can it access instead of what it is returning to. Because to some extent, the idea is that if we're accessing something that is beyond articulation, but that something that is beyond articulation is not something, but can only be articulable in forms. So we are really arriving at a matter that form and substrate, and form and contents, whatever you want to see it, affects and tangibility, the everyday and the non-everyday, transcendence and immanence are supposed to be indistinguishable, which is also Deleuze's last essay, his short address, which I think is really deeply questioning what philosophy is really doing and what can it do through language and affects, which also bring me to the inspiration that Jessica and Ahmed are giving us is precisely the idea of the everyday object, is precisely the convergence, or precisely where the discrimination and non-discrimination between the universal and the particular, or the collective individuations are negotiated. Sorry, I'm rambling, but thank you again for like both of your presentations are extremely brilliant, and thank you very much for that.
Could I take the rest of the questions and ask the speakers to respond in one go?
Sure. One minor comment and major question. The minor comment is for Eric, because earlier in your presentation, which I enjoyed very much, we all remember what Mao Zedong said about 人定胜天. And as a scholar of Chinese literature, and I would like to point out that this thing usually translated as a must, which is problematic because the original sentence is from 吕氏春秋, and the entire sentence is like 天定则圣人, 人定则圣天. Or I should use Cantonese because we're in Hong Kong. The rest of it is 夫郎中即食人, 人中即食郎. That actually means it's the kind of determinism. So if it's determined by Tian, heaven, or nature, then the nature will win. The opposite, if it's determined by human beings or humans, then nature will win. And that's why, and followed by an example, 狼众则食人. If there are too many wolves, that goes to a wolf totem. If there are too many wolves, then humans will be eaten by wolves. The opposite. If too many humans, then wolf will be eaten. Yeah. So this thing is actually not must. It should be translated determined. There's some other scholars understand it as settled. If it's settled by nature or settled by humans. So it's just for your information, because this determinism is so related to our understanding of the environment.
Right.
Yeah. And the big question for my colleague Jessica, I enjoy it very much because you mentioned clothing and food. And in addition to that, I thought about architecture. Because architecture is also an object, a big object that we live in. So it's our environment too. I'm thinking architecture in terms of mosque, because the mosque is very specific for the Muslim or for the Uyghur culture. What made me think of this question is the recent news you heard about the construction of the mosque in Yunnan province. Yeah, so this is for Jessica.
May I? Thank you very much. And may I reflect the question to Albert? I mean, I wonder whether can you hear me? And my colleague Howard is asking about for example, may I combine the question with Victor's comment? How much do you think the personal relationship with the mosque of a Uyghur person overlap with the collective feeling for the mosque as a person, as a nation, you know what I'm talking about? I don't know.
Yeah, especially in terms of identity.
And also,
Identity.
Perhaps we might even want to bring a third layer to that, which is the feelings for the mosque of the Islamic community. So I'm talking about three levels of feelings for the mosque. It's the Muslims, the Uyghur, and the individual. Would you like to comment on that?
Thank you.
Yes, thanks for the question. Actually, we in our presentation we didn't really mention the role of Islam in the identity of Uyghurs. I think there are several reasons. First is in the past 70 years, the de-Islamization movement has been on and in a circle to de-Islam this nation. So many of in different generations, including the younger generations, Islam is not so much important for them, but more like a background. And our intelligence, more of them are secular, and there are many different ideas or talks among Islam of Uyghurs. So it could be very different between individual. If you are in if you were rising in a more religious family or environment, then mosque means something very important. That's the center of your community, and that's somewhere you meet the people in every day, especially in during Ramadan and during the festival and during funeral and wedding, and you have more close combination with those imams and the community. We call that Jama'at. And another thing is for the identity of this nation, we are a nation that became Muslim when Islam arrived in Central Asia. We can use an example as our colleague mentioned this conflict in Yunnan nowadays. Those Sinic Muslims, so the so-called Hui or Huihui or Huizu in Chinese, they lost almost all their identity and collective memories before they were Sinophized during the early Ming period. So the only thing can make them be a group and let them hold the collective identity was only Islam, because that was the only thing the Ming court didn't attack on. Because there's a Ming at early period of Ming, they've forbidden the foreign names, foreign dresses, foreign hairstyle, and even intermarriage among those foreigners. They were forced to marry Chinese and speak Chinese and extra. So mosque means much more important to those Sinic Muslims. That's something combined with their national identity. But for us, for example, if you're a Muslim and you're Uyghur, when you are out of your homeland, for example, in Europe, in Turkey, in US, somewhere else, they were also Muslims there, and you join the local community via mosque. You don't need to hold a mosque for yourself, because you share, there are many similarity you share with those people, although we have more difference among with Arabic people, but the Turkic and those non-Shia Iranic spoken people, we actually share a lot in Islam practicing. So we can go to almost every mosque, but there we are just practicing our Muslim identity, not the identity of the nation. So that's what I think. I don't know if this explanation fulfill the expectation of the question. Thanks.
Okay.
I said you have become very pretty today.
Thank you. I was going to show those items like different kind of tupa
Wow.
Mm.
Yes.
and also atlas
Yes.
Mm.
Yeah.
and even
Musical instrument. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. The guitar. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank-
Thank you. Perhaps a quick response for the question for Carl, and then there's also Diane has asked several, but some of our speakers have already responded. So maybe a quick one on the question of universality and individuality.
Yeah. No, I don't know if you heard me. I said it's going to be really hard to be quick, but I'll try. So yeah, I think what's interesting is that there might be kind of particular or singular ways to get to that universality that's already kind of there. So particular or different ways might be able to kind of bring it into being. I was thinking again, which I've been very inspired by, of like Yukoi's work, who talks about this idea of trying to produce more diversity, rather than just kind of protecting it, but in a way that those diversities are kind of also connected up, that they become planetary and not just kind of like, kind of radically singular ways that would have no connection to anything else. So I think kind of different artworks might kind of do it in different ways. And they ought to be kind of respected, I think, for their differences about being able to bring these strange kind of experiences into being, this kind of like non-conceptual kind of, I suppose, a non-rational way of thinking. And I guess also what's interesting about Deleuze and Guattari, I think, is that their kind of notion of language that they take from the Danish linguist, who I can never ever pronounce his name because I've never ever heard it. I've only just seen it written, Helgem. I don't know how to pronounce that. And this idea of a kind of expressivity that is not opposed to language, but that maybe comes through language. And I was thinking about the dancer Simone Forti, who talks about when she was kind of creating scores, she always felt that there was something about the original materiality, along with her original inspiration for the work, that might strangely have been committed, it was kind of strangely communicated, kind of in and through the materials that she's using. So it's not that in some ways language always is a problem to an extent, but I think in a way that different forms of language might be able to communicate something, obviously not bring it into being because that's impossible, but might be able to communicate some of the feeling of that kind of non-conceptual way of thinking. That's kind of what I think, that there might be a kind of an expressivity that comes in and through language, that comes in and through form, that allows that experience to be communicated and felt.
Thank you. Thank you for being concise. Eric, I take advantage of the fact that we will be around, so I think we can continue the discussion. To those of you online, Zimu and Minty, thank you so much for your papers and your contribution. I'm sure the conversation will continue. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.